When Elena Whitmore's perfectly manicured finger pointed across the crowded grocery store, her voice cutting through the evening bustle like broken glass, she had no idea she was about to shatter more than just the silence. The homeless-looking man clutching a crying infant wasn't what he seemed. Neither was she. Sometimes the most desperate acts of protection look exactly like theft, and sometimes the people we judge most harshly are fighting battles we can't even imagine. What happened next would force both of them to confront the lies they told themselves about who they really were. Before we dive in, make sure to hit subscribe and leave a comment. Where in the world are you watching from? The fluorescent lights hummed overhead like dying insects, casting their harsh glow over the late evening shoppers at Freshmart. Elena Whitmore stood in the organic produce section, her manicured fingers selecting perfect Roma tomatoes with the same precision she used to choose her words in board meetings. Everything about her screamed money: the tailored wool coat that cost more than most people's rent, the Hermes bag slung over her shoulder, the diamond wedding ring that caught the light with every movement. She placed each tomato in a separate plastic bag, the way the housekeeper had taught her. One bruise could ruin the whole batch. The baby started crying 3 aisles over. Elena's hand stilled on a particularly red tomato. The sound cut through her chest in a way she hadn't expected, hadn't felt in months. She closed her eyes, counting to 10 the way Dr. Hartman had taught her. Breathe in for 4, hold for 4, out for 4. The crying got louder. When she opened her eyes, she saw him. He was hunched over a shopping cart in the cereal aisle, his back to her, rocking slightly as he tried to soothe the infant in his arms. His clothes hung loose on his thin frame, a faded military jacket that had seen better decades, jeans with holes that weren't fashionable, boots held together with duct tape. His dark hair was too long, unkempt, and when he turned slightly, she could see the shadow of several days' worth of stubble. The baby kept crying. Other shoppers were starting to stare. A woman with pink curlers pushed her cart a little faster past the aisle. A teenage employee pretended to organize soup cans while sneaking glances. Elena found herself walking closer, drawn by something she couldn't name. The man was whispering to the baby now, his voice too low to make out the words, but there was something desperate in his posture. The infant, it couldn't be more than a few months old, was red-faced and inconsolable, tiny fists waving in the air. "Shh, sweetheart," the man murmured, finally loud enough for Elena to hear. I know. We're almost done." Elena stopped at the end-cap display of pasta sauce, pretending to study the labels while watching. There was something wrong with this picture. The man's cart contained only the basics formula: diapers, a loaf of white bread, peanut butter, a gallon of milk. But the baby. The baby was wearing a pristine white onesie with delicate pink embroidery, hand-stitched by the look of it. Expensive. The kind of thing Elena had spent hours researching online, bookmarking pages she'd never have reason to visit. The man tried shifting the baby to his other arm, but his movements were clumsy, uncertain. Like he wasn't used to holding an infant. The baby's cries escalated to screams. Elena's chest tightened. Around them, more people were taking notice. An elderly man shook his head disapprovingly. A mother with 2 toddlers hurried past, pulling her children closer. The man looked around desperately, sweat beading on his forehead despite the store's air conditioning. His eyes met Elena's for just a moment, dark eyes, exhausted and filled with something that might have been panic. That's when Elena saw the hospital bracelet. It was mostly hidden by his jacket sleeve, but when he reached up to brush the hair from his face, the white plastic band became visible around his wrist. Fresh. The kind they gave you when you were admitted. Elena's breath caught. The baby's screams were drawing more attention now. A store manager appeared at the far end of the aisle, clipboard in hand, watching with the practiced eye of someone paid to spot trouble. The man noticed too. Elena saw his jaw tighten, saw him glance toward the exits. The baby wailed louder, if that was possible. That's when it happened. The man turned away from the approaching manager, clutching the baby closer, and started walking quickly toward the front of the store. Not running, but moving with purpose. The kind of purpose that looked an awful lot like guilt to anyone watching. The baby's cries echoed off the high ceiling. The manager spoke into his radio, and Elena heard herself shout across the store, her voice carrying over the crying, over the hum of freezers and cash registers and evening shoppers. "Someone steal that baby." The words left her mouth before she could stop them, before she could think. They came from someplace deep and primal, from the part of her that had spent 6 months preparing a nursery that would never be used. Every head in the store turned. The man froze, his back still to her. The baby pressed against his chest. His shoulders went rigid. That man! Elena's voice was shaking now, her finger pointing across the produce section. "He's stealing that baby." The store went silent except for the infant's cries. The man turned around slowly, and Elena got her first clear look at his face. He was younger than she'd thought, maybe 35, with hollow cheeks and dark circles under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and too much worry. But it wasn't guilt she saw there, it was heartbreak. "Ma'am," he said quietly, his voice hoarse, "this is my daughter." The baby had gone quiet in his arms, as if sensing the tension. Elena could see her clearly now, perfect pink skin, a dusting of dark hair, tiny fingers curled into fists. She was beautiful. "Prove it," Elena heard herself say. The store manager was walking toward them now, along with 2 employees who looked like they wished they were anywhere else. Other customers had formed a loose circle, phones appearing in hands like flowers blooming after rain. The man looked down at the baby in his arms, then back at Elena. Something passed across his face, resignation maybe, or understanding. "Her name is Lucy," he said softly. "Lucy Rose Martinez. She's 3 months old. She was born at Mercy General on March 15th at 2:47 in the morning. She weighed 6 pounds, 4 ounces. His voice cracked on the last word. Elena felt her certainty waver. "She likes to be rocked side to side, not front to back," he continued, demonstrating the motion unconsciously. The baby settled against his chest. "She gets hiccups after every bottle. She only sleeps if you play that lullaby about the mockingbird." The store manager had reached them now, a thin man with nervous eyes and a badge that read, "Kevin, Assistant Manager." "Sir, is there a problem here?" The man, Martinez, looked around at the circle of faces watching him. Elena saw him swallow hard. "No problem," he said, "just trying to buy some formula for my daughter." "This lady says—" "This lady," Martinez interrupted, his eyes finding Elena's again, "made a mistake." Elena opened her mouth to argue, but something stopped her. Maybe it was the way he held the baby, protective but gentle, like she was made of spun glass. Maybe it was the hospital bracelet she could see more clearly now, the date stamp from just 3 days ago. Maybe it was the fact that the baby had stopped crying the moment he'd spoken her name. Elena began, then stopped. The store manager looked between them, clearly out of his depth. "Ma'am, you want to file a report, or—" Elena looked at Martinez again, at the baby in his arms, at the sparse contents of his shopping cart, at the exhaustion etched into every line of his face. "No," she said finally. "No report. I was wrong." The crowd began to disperse, disappointed by the lack of drama. The manager lingered for a moment, then shrugged and walked away. In moments, it was just Elena and Martinez and the baby, standing in the fluorescent glow of the grocery store. "Thank you," Martinez said quietly. Elena nodded, not trusting her voice. He started to turn away, then stopped. "For what it's worth," he said without looking back, "I understand why you thought. I know how this looks." And then he was walking away. Pushing his cart toward the checkout lanes, the baby settled peacefully in his arms. Elena stood there long after they'd gone, staring at the spot where they'd been, her hand pressed to her chest where her heart was beating too fast. She didn't buy the tomatoes. Elena sat in her car in the parking lot for 20 minutes after leaving the store, her hands gripping the steering wheel, staring at nothing. The house was dark when she finally pulled into the circular driveway. Richard's car wasn't there, another late meeting, another client dinner. Another excuse to avoid coming home to the silence that had settled between them like dust on unused furniture. She let herself in through the side door, dropping her keys in the crystal bowl on the marble-top table. The sound echoed through the foyer. The house was too big. It had always been too big, even when they'd bought it 3 years ago, but especially now. Especially since. Elena climbed the stairs slowly, her hand trailing along the mahogany banister Richard's mother had insisted they needed. A proper banister for a proper home, she'd said. For when the children come. She paused at the door to what had been the nursery. They'd closed it 6 months ago, sealed it like a tomb. But Elena had a key. She turned the handle and stepped inside. The room was exactly as they'd left it. Yellow walls, because they'd wanted to be surprised. A white crib with a mobile of dancing elephants. A rocking chair by the window where Elena had planned to nurse, to read bedtime stories, to watch the sunrise during those early morning feedings she'd read about in all the books. She sat in the rocking chair now and closed her eyes. Lucy Rose Martinez, 6 pounds, 4 ounces. Born at Mercy General. Elena had lost their baby at 36 weeks. Close enough to full term that they'd had to deliver, had to hold their son, had to say goodbye before they'd ever really said hello. They'd named him James, after Richard's father. James Alexander Whitmore, who lived for exactly 17 minutes. The funeral had been small, private. Richard's idea. No need to make a spectacle, he'd said, as if grief were something unseemly, something to be managed quietly and efficiently like a merger gone wrong. Elena rocked slowly in the chair, back and forth, side to side. She thought about Martinez, about the way he'd held his daughter, about the hospital bracelet around his wrist, about the exhaustion in his eyes that she recognized because she saw it in her own mirror every morning. Her phone buzzed. A text from Richard, working late again. "Don't wait up." She typed back, "Okay." Then she deleted it and typed, "We need to talk." Then she deleted that too and typed, "Okay" again, and hit send. Elena sat in the rocking chair until well past midnight, thinking about babies and mistakes and the way accusation could sound exactly like grief when it came from the right kind of broken heart. She thought about Martinez pushing his cart through the checkout line, counting out crumpled bills to pay for formula and diapers while other customers watched and whispered. She thought about Lucy Rose Martinez, 3 months old, who liked to be rocked side to side and got hiccups after every bottle. She thought about James Alexander Whitmore, who would have been 4 months old now, if, when she finally went to bed, Richard still wasn't home. She lay in the dark, listening to the house settle around her, to the sound of her own breathing, to the silence where a baby's cry should have been. Tomorrow, she decided, she would drive back to Freshmart. She wasn't sure why yet, but she knew she had to. Elena woke before dawn, the way she had every morning since James. She lay in bed listening to Richard's steady breathing beside her, watching the gray light creep through the gaps in the blackout curtains they'd installed when she couldn't bear the thought of sunshine. At 6:30, Richard's alarm buzzed. He reached over to silence it without opening his eyes, then rolled away from her to check his phone. The blue glow illuminated his profile, the sharp nose his mother was so proud of, the jaw that had gone a little soft around the edges in the past year. "Early meeting today," he mumbled into his pillow. Might be late again tonight. The Henderson account." Elena knew there was no Henderson account. There hadn't been for months. But she also knew that Richard needed his lies the same way she needed her sleeping pills, and so she said nothing. He showered and dressed in the walk-in closet, emerging 20 minutes later in one of his identical navy suits, smelling like expensive cologne and avoidance. "See you tonight," he said, kissing the top of her head without really looking at her. "Richard," he paused at the bedroom door, his back to her. "Do you ever think about him?" Richard's shoulders tensed. "Elena, about what he would have looked like? Whether he would have had your eyes or mine? We agreed we wouldn't do this. You agreed. I just stopped talking about it." Richard turned around then, and for a moment she saw something flicker across his face. Pain, maybe. Or just impatience. "What's the point?" he said. "It won't bring him back." After he left, Elena sat at the Kit Blake Island with a cup of coffee she didn't drink, staring out at the perfectly manicured lawn that cost more to maintain than most people's cars. The gardener would be here later to tend to flowers she'd never asked for, in colors that reminded her too much of the nursery they'd sealed away. At 9:30, she drove to Fresh Mart. The store looked different in the morning light streaming through the tall windows, brighter, more ordinary. Elena pushed a cart through the automatic doors, not sure what she was looking for, only that she needed to be here. She found herself in the cereal aisle where she'd first seen Martinez the night before. The shelves were fully stocked now, boxes aligned with military precision, no sign of the chaos that had erupted here less than 12 hours ago. "Excuse me." Elena turned to find a woman in her 60s with kind eyes and a Fresh Mart vest, straightening boxes of granola. "You were here last night, weren't you?" the woman asked. "During all that commotion with the baby?" Elena nodded, not trusting her voice. "That poor man," the woman continued, shaking her head. "I've seen him in here a few times over the past couple weeks. Always buying the same things, formula, diapers, baby food. Always looks like he hasn't slept in a month. You know him?" "Not really. But my daughter works the night shift at Mercy General. She mentioned they had a real sad case come through last week. Young father, lost his wife in childbirth. Complications, you know. Left him with a newborn and no idea how to take care of her." Elena's chest tightened. "His wife died?" 3 days after the baby was born. They tried everything, but..." The woman shrugged sadly. "Sometimes God has different plans than we do." Elena gripped the handle of her cart. "The hospital bracelet. I saw him wearing one." "Oh, that. Poor thing had a panic attack right there in the maternity ward. First time holding his daughter without his wife there to help. Ended up in the ER. That's when my daughter met him. She was on rotation that night." The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, the same frequency as the night before, but now they sounded different to Elena. Less like dying insects, more like a lullaby played too slow. "What's his name?" Elena asked quietly. "David, I think. David Martinez. Lives in one of those little apartments above the auto shop on 5th Street. Not much, but it's what he can afford on disability." "Disability? Army veteran?" "Afghanistan," my daughter said. "Came back with shrapnel in his leg and nightmares that won't quit. Was just starting to get his life together when he met his wife. Got married, found out about the baby, thought maybe things were finally looking up." Elena closed her eyes. "And then she died. And then she died," the woman confirmed. "Left him with a 3-month-old and no clue how to raise her on his own. Been coming in here at odd hours because the baby sleeps better during car rides. Probably figures the fewer people around, the less chance someone will judge him for not knowing what he's doing." Elena opened her eyes. "But I did judge him." The woman studied Elena's face with the practiced eye of someone who'd raised 4 children and buried 1 husband. "We all judge, honey. Question is what we do about it after." Elena bought a basket of groceries she didn't need and drove to 5th Street. The auto shop squatted between a laundromat and a check-cashing place, its bay doors open to reveal the grease-stained concrete inside. The apartments above were accessed by a narrow staircase on the side of the building, metal steps that clanged under Elena's heels as she climbed. She stood outside apartment 2B for a full 5 minutes before knocking. The door opened to reveal David Martinez in a rumpled t-shirt and the same jeans from the night before. His hair stuck up at odd angles, and there were formula stains on his shirt. Behind him, Elena could hear the soft sounds of a baby stirring. "Mrs.," he began, then stopped. "I'm sorry, I don't know your name." "Elena." "Elena Whitmore." He nodded, unsurprised. "What can I do for you, Elena?" She held up the grocery bags. "I brought some things. For the baby. Formula, diapers, some food for you." David looked at the bags, then back at her face. "That's kind, but we're okay. Please." The word came out more desperate than she'd intended. I need to. I owe you an apology. A real one. After a long moment, he stepped aside to let her in. The apartment was tiny, a living room that doubled as a bedroom, a kit plaquette with a half-sized refrigerator, a bathroom she could see through an open door. But it was clean, and there were signs everywhere of a man trying his best. A bassinet by the window, bottles drying on a dish towel, a stack of parenting books on the coffee table with titles like What to Expect the First Year and Fathering Alone. Lucy Rose Martinez was sleeping in a bouncy seat, her tiny fist curled against her cheek. She looked even smaller in the daylight, more fragile. "She's beautiful," Elena whispered. "She looks like her mother," David said, and his voice carried the weight of a man who'd had to learn to speak about his wife in the past tense. Maria had the same dark hair, the same little nose. Elena set the grocery bags on the counter. "I'm sorry about your wife." David's hand stilled on the stack of mail he'd been sorting. "How did you?" "I asked around. I needed to understand." "Understand what?" Elena looked at Lucy, at the rise and fall of her small chest, at the way her eyelashes rested against her cheeks like tiny crescents. "Why I did what I did last night," she said. "Why I accused you of something so terrible." David sat down on the couch, suddenly looking older than his years. "You thought you were protecting her." "No." Elena shook her head. "I thought I was protecting myself." Lucy stirred in her seat, making small sounds that might become cries if left unattended. David was up immediately, scooping her into his arms with movements that had grown more natural in the past few weeks. "Hey there, sweetheart," he murmured. "Did we wake you up?" Elena watched him bounce her gently, the motion automatic now. "You're getting good at that." "Trial by fire," David said. "First few nights, I thought I might lose my mind. She'd cry and I'd try everything, feeding, changing, rocking. Nothing worked. Maria always knew exactly what she needed, but you figured it out. I'm still figuring it out." He looked down at Lucy, who had settled against his chest. "Every day is different. Every night is a new challenge. Sometimes I lie awake wondering if I'm screwing her up, if she'd be better off with someone who actually knows what they're doing." Elena felt tears prick her eyes. "She's lucky to have you." David looked up at her then, really looked at her, and Elena saw recognition dawn in his eyes. "You lost a baby," he said quietly. It wasn't a question. Elena nodded, not trusting her voice. "Recently?" 6 months ago. A son, James." The name felt strange on her tongue. She so rarely said it out loud anymore. David was quiet for a long moment, Lucy sleeping peacefully in his arms. "Is that why you're here?" he asked finally. "Because you feel guilty about last night, or because you miss what you lost?" Elena looked around the small apartment at the evidence of David's devotion scattered everywhere. The carefully sterilized bottles, the parenting books with post-it notes sticking out from dozens of pages, the mobile hanging over the bassinet that he'd probably spent an hour figuring out how to assemble. "Both," she admitted. "I see you with her, and I think about everything I'll never have. Everything James will never be. And I hate myself for envying you when you've lost so much more than I have." "Loss isn't a competition," David said gently. "Your son mattered. Your grief matters." Elena wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "My husband thinks I should be over it by now. He's thrown himself into work, into moving forward. I can't even clean out the nursery. Some people grieve by running away from it, others grieve by sitting with it." David shifted Lucy to his other arm. "Neither way is wrong. Which way are you?" David looked down at his daughter, at her perfect little face, at the way her hand had found its way to his finger and was holding on. "I'm grieving by holding on," he said. "To her. To the parts of Maria I can see in her face. To the life we're going to build together, even if it's not the life we planned." Elena felt something crack open in her chest, something that had been frozen solid for months. "I don't know how to do that," she whispered. "Neither did I," David said. "But I'm learning." Lucy stirred again, this time opening her eyes dark like her father's, alert and curious. She looked at Elena with the serious expression babies get when they're trying to figure out the world. "Hi, Lucy Rose," Elena said softly. The baby blinked once, twice, then her face crumpled as if she might cry. "She's probably hungry," David said, starting to get up. "Wait." Elena reached out instinctively. Would it be okay if I held her, just for a minute?" David hesitated for a moment, then slowly transferred Lucy to Elena's arms. The weight of her was shocking. Elena had forgotten how solid babies were, how warm. Lucy settled against her chest, one tiny fist curling around Elena's finger with surprising strength. "She likes you," David observed. Elena looked down at Lucy's face, at the way her eyes were starting to drift closed again, at the trust implicit in her relaxed posture. "She's perfect," Elena breathed. "She's everything," David said quietly. They sat in silence for a while, Elena holding Lucy while David watched, both of them lost in their own thoughts. Outside, the sounds of the auto shop drifted up through the thin walls, the hiss of air tools, the clang of metal on metal, the everyday symphony of people fixing broken things. Finally, Lucy began to fuss, and Elena reluctantly handed her back to David. "I should go," she said, though she made no move to leave. "Elena." David settled Lucy in her bouncy seat and turned to face her. "What happened last night?" "It wasn't about me, was it?" "Not really." Elena shook her head. "I saw you with her, and I saw everything I was supposed to have, everything I lost. And for a moment I thought if someone was taking a baby who didn't belong to them, maybe the universe was trying to make some kind of trade. That's not how it works. I know that. Now. But last night, in that moment, grief makes you think crazy things." David nodded. "Grief makes you do crazy things too. Last week I bought $50 worth of baby clothes in newborn size. Lucy's already outgrown newborn. They're just sitting in a drawer, tags still on, because I couldn't admit that she's growing up without her mother there to see it." Elena looked at the grocery bags on the counter, at the diapers and formula she'd bought as penance. "I don't know how to fix what I did," she said. "You don't have to fix it," David replied. "You just have to move forward from it. Both of us do." Elena stood up, gathering her purse and keys. At the door, she turned back. "David, if you ever need someone to watch Lucy while you go to the store, or just someone to talk to, I live at 1247 Maple Ridge, the big white house with the iron gates. I know the one," David said. "Fancy neighborhood." "Lonely neighborhood," Elena corrected. David shifted Lucy to his shoulder, patting her back gently. "Why are you offering?" Elena thought about the question, about the empty nursery and the silent dinners, and the way Richard looked through her instead of at her these days. "Because maybe we both need someone who understands," she said finally. David nodded slowly. "Maybe we do." Elena let herself out, walking carefully down the metal stairs and back to her car. As she drove away, she could see David in the window, Lucy in his arms, both of them watching her go. For the first time in 6 months, Elena felt like she was driving towards something instead of away from it. Elena didn't expect David to call. She went about her days the way she had for months, yoga classes she attended but didn't participate in, charity luncheons where she wrote checks to causes she couldn't remember, dinners with Richard where they discussed everything except the one thing that mattered. But she found herself thinking about Lucy Rose Martinez at odd moments. The way her tiny hand had gripped Elena's finger, the soft weight of her against Elena's chest. The serious expression in her dark eyes, as if she were trying to solve some profound mystery. It had been 4 days since her visit to David's apartment when her phone rang at 2 in the afternoon. "Elena?" The voice was strained, exhausted. "This is David Martinez. I'm sorry to bother you, but Lucy's been crying for 6 hours straight and I think something's wrong and I don't know who else to call." Elena was in her car before he finished the sentence. She found David pacing a small apartment. Lucy screaming in his arms, both of them looking like they'd been through a war. David's eyes were red-rimmed, his hair sticking up at wild angles. His t-shirt was soaked with sweat and what looked like spit-up. "I've tried everything," he said over the baby's cries. "Fed her, changed her, rocked her, took her temperature, it's normal. But she won't stop crying and I'm afraid I'm doing something wrong." Elena took Lucy gently from his arms. The baby's face was red and blotchy, her tiny fists clenched, her body rigid with distress. "When did this start?" Elena asked, automatically shifting into the swaying motion that seemed to calm Lucy slightly. "This morning. She's been fussy all week, but today." David rubbed his face with both hands. "I called the pediatrician, but they can't see her until Friday. The nurse said it might be colic. But what if it's something else? What if she's in pain and I'm just too stupid to figure out what's wrong?" Elena studied Lucy's face, noting the way she pulled her knees up toward her chest, the particular quality of her cry, not the sharp wail of hunger or the demanding cry of a wet diaper, but something deeper, more uncomfortable. "David, do you have any gas drops? Simethicone? Gas drops?" Elena was already reaching for her purse. "There's a pharmacy downstairs next to the check-cashing place. Get some Little Tummy's gas drops, they'll be in the baby section. And get some gripe water too." David grabbed his wallet and keys, looking relieved to have something concrete to do. While he was gone, Elena walked the apartment with Lucy, humming softly under her breath. She'd learned this song 6 months ago, had practiced it while folding tiny clothes and arranging stuffed animals, preparing for a baby who would never hear it. "Hush, little baby, don't say a word. Mama's gonna buy you a mockingbird." Lucy's crying softened slightly, though she remained tense and uncomfortable. Elena continued humming, adding a gentle bouncing motion to her steps. She'd read about this somewhere, or maybe Dr. Hartman had mentioned it during one of their sessions. Babies spent 9 months being constantly rocked in the womb. Sometimes they needed that motion replicated to feel secure. When David returned, slightly out of breath, Lucy's cries had diminished to occasional whimpers. "How did you?" he began. "Gas drops first," Elena said, still swaying with Lucy. "Then we'll try the gripe water if that doesn't work." David fumbled with the package, his hands shaking slightly from exhaustion and stress. Elena guided him through measuring out the correct dosage, then administered the drops while he held Lucy steady. "Now we wait," Elena said, "and keep moving, the motion helps." They took turns walking the apartment, trading Lucy back and forth when their arms got tired. Slowly, gradually, the baby began to relax. Her cries became less frequent, then stopped altogether. Her tiny fists unclenched, and she began to look around with curious eyes instead of screwed-shut distress. "Jesus," David breathed, sinking onto the couch as Lucy settled peacefully in his arms. "I thought I was going to lose my mind." "You did fine," Elena said, settling beside him. "New parent panic is completely normal. Richard and I," she stopped, realizing what she'd been about to say. "Richard and you what?" Elena looked at Lucy, now contentedly sucking on her fist. "We had this whole plan. Richard was going to handle the practical stuff, doctor's appointments, sleep schedules, college savings accounts. I was going to handle the emotional stuff, bedtime stories, scraped knees, middle-of-the-night comfort. We thought we had it all figured out. But you never got the chance to find out if the plan would work." "No." Elena's voice was quiet. "We never got the chance for any of it." David shifted Lucy to his shoulder, patting her back gently. "What would you have done if James had lived and had a day like today?" Elena considered the question. "I would have panicked, just like you did. Called my mother, probably, even though she lives in Phoenix and couldn't do anything from there. Maybe driven to the emergency room, convinced something terrible was happening. Instead, you knew exactly what to do. I got lucky. I remembered reading about colic symptoms." Elena paused. "And I've been reading those parenting books on your coffee table," David looked surprised. When? I bought copies. After I visited you. I told myself it was just curiosity, but… She trailed off, unsure how to explain the compulsion that had driven her to Barnes Noble at 10 o'clock on a Tuesday night, filling a cart with guides to infant care she'd never get to use. But you're grieving the experience you didn't get to have, David finished gently. Elena nodded, not trusting her voice. Lucy had fallen asleep against David's chest, her breathing deep and even, one small hand fisted in his t-shirt. The apartment was quiet except for the distant sounds of the auto shop below and the whisper of her breath. Elena, David said after a long moment, would you like to stay for dinner? I was planning to order pizza, nothing fancy, but I'd like that. They ordered from a place that delivered, sitting on the floor around David's coffee table while Lucy slept in her bouncy seat nearby. The pizza was mediocre, but Elena couldn't remember the last time she'd enjoyed a meal more. Tell me about Maria, she said, emboldened by the wine David had found in the back of his refrigerator. David's face softened. She was a nurse at the VA hospital. That's how we met. She was assigned to my case when I was dealing with some PTSD stuff. Completely against regulations for her to date a patient, but she said she'd never let rules stop her from getting what she wanted. What did she want? To fix broken things. David smiled, the first genuine smile Elena had seen from him. Broken soldiers, broken hearts, broken people who thought they were beyond repair. She had this theory that everything could be healed with enough patience and the right kind of love. Elena felt a pang of something that might have been envy. She sounds wonderful. She was. She was also stubborn as hell and had terrible taste in movies and could burn water if you let her near a stove. David's smile faltered. The pregnancy was hard on her. High blood pressure, swelling, headaches. But she was so excited about the baby. Used to talk to her belly every night, telling Lucy about all the places they were going to go together, all the things she was going to teach her. Did she get to hold her? Before? David nodded. 3 days. We had 3 perfect days. Maria got to nurse her, got to see her eyes open for the first time. She named her Lucy Rose Lucy after her grandmother, Rose after the flowers I brought her on our first date. Elena wiped her eyes with her napkin. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have asked. No, it's okay. I don't get to talk about her much. People get uncomfortable when you mention your dead wife. Elena understood. People got uncomfortable when you mentioned your dead son, too. Lucy stirred in her seat, making small sounds that weren't quite cries yet. David was up immediately, lifting her with practiced ease. Someone's hungry, he murmured, moving toward the kit Blake to prepare a bottle. Elena watched him work the efficient movements, the way he tested the temperature on his wrist, the gentle way he supported Lucy's head as he settled back on the couch to feed her. This was what parenthood looked like, she realized. Not the Pinterest-perfect nurseries or the carefully planned schedules, but this quiet competence born of necessity and love. You're a good father, she said. David looked up from Lucy's face. Some days, I'm not so sure. Trust me, you are. Her phone buzzed. A text from Richard. Another late night. Don't wait up. Elena turned the phone face down on the coffee table. Husband? David asked, settling back with Lucy. Husband. He doesn't know you're here. It wasn't a question, but Elena answered anyway. No. Will that be a problem? Elena watched Lucy's tiny fingers curl around the bottle, watched the contentment on her face as she drank. Probably. Richard doesn't understand why I can't just move on. He thinks grief should have an expiration date. And you disagree. I think grief changes you. It becomes part of who you are. You can't just shed it like an old coat. David was quiet for a moment, adjusting Lucy's position as she settled deeper into sleep. After Maria died, he said finally, the grief counselor at the hospital told me that healing meant letting go, that I needed to accept what happened and focus on moving forward. But Lucy looks exactly like her mother. Every day I see Maria in her face, in the way she scrunches up her nose when she's thinking. How do you let go of something that's staring at you with your wife's eyes? Elena felt something shift in her chest, like a door opening that had been locked for months. You don't let go, she said quietly. You learn to carry it differently. Is that what you're doing? Learning to carry it differently? Elena looked around the small apartment, at the evidence of David's love scattered everywhere, at Lucy sleeping peacefully in his arms. I'm trying to, she said. When Lucy finished her bottle, David handed her to Elena while he cleaned up the dinner dishes. Elena settled back on the couch, Lucy warm and solid against her chest, and for the first time since losing James, holding a baby didn't feel like torture. It felt like possibility. Elena, David said from the Kit Blake, thank you for today, for knowing what to do when I didn't. Thank you for calling me. I almost didn't. I kept thinking you had enough problems of your own without taking on mine. Elena looked down at Lucy, at her perfect little face, at the way her eyelashes cast shadows on her cheeks in the lamplight. Maybe that's the point, she said. Maybe helping each other is how we get through. David came back to the couch, settling beside them. Is that what we're doing, helping each other? Elena considered the question. She thought about the empty house waiting for her, about Richard's avoidance and her own isolation. Then she thought about David's panic this afternoon, about the relief in his eyes when Lucy finally stopped crying. Yes, she said, I think it is. Lucy stirred in her arms, making soft baby sounds, and Elena found herself humming again without thinking about it. If that mockingbird won't sing, Mama's gonna buy you a diamond ring. David smiled. She likes that song. Maria used to sing it to her when she was still in the womb. Elena's voice caught slightly on the next line, but she kept going. If that diamond ring turns brass, Mama's gonna buy you a looking glass. Outside, the auto shop was closing for the night, the sounds of machinery giving way to the quiet hum of evening traffic. Lucy slept peacefully in Elena's arms, and for the first time in 6 months, Elena felt like she was exactly where she needed to be. Elena arrived home to find Richard's car in the driveway and the lights on in his study. She sat in her car for a moment, watching his silhouette move behind the curtains, and realized she would have to tell him where she'd been. She found him at his desk, laptop open, papers scattered across the mahogany surface. He looked up when she entered, and she saw him take in her appearance, wrinkled clothes, hair mussed from Lucy pulling at it, the lingering smell of baby formula on her shirt. You're home late, he said carefully. So are you. Richard closed his laptop and leaned back in his chair. Elena, where have you been? She could lie, make up a story about dinner with friends, about shopping, about anything other than the truth. But looking at her husband's face at the careful distance he'd maintained between them for months, she found she didn't want to. I was with a friend, she said, helping with his baby. Richard's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. His baby, David Martinez. I met him a few days ago. He's a single father, and his daughter was having a difficult day. A single father. Richard stood up, moving to pour himself a scotch from the crystal decanter on the sidebar. He didn't offer her one. How did you meet him? Elena sat down in one of the leather chairs across from his desk, the same chairs where they'd once planned their future together, discussed baby names and nursery colors and the life they were going to build. At the grocery store, she said. There was a misunderstanding. Richard sipped his scotch, studying her face. What kind of misunderstanding? Elena told him about that night at Freshmart, about her accusation and the scene that followed. She watched his expression grow more distant with each detail. You accused a stranger of kidnapping, he said when she finished. Yes, in public, where people could have filmed it. Elena felt a familiar knot form in her stomach. I wasn't thinking about Jesus, Elena. Richard set down his glass harder than necessary. Do you have any idea what that could have done to my reputation? To the firm's reputation? If someone had posted that online, a man's wife had just died? Elena interrupted. He was alone with a newborn baby and no idea how to take care of her. I was wrong to accuse him, but I was trying to make amends. By inserting yourself into his life? Richard's voice was rising now, taking on the tone he used in courtroom cross-examinations. Elena, you don't know anything about this man. He could be dangerous. He could be lying about his circumstances to take advantage of your guilt. He's not lying. How do you know? Because I see the way he looks at her. Elena stood up, facing her husband across the desk. The way he holds her like she's made of spun glass. The way his whole world revolves around making sure she's safe and fed and loved. Richard was quiet for a moment, swirling the scotch in his glass. The way I never got to look at James, he said finally, and his voice was so quiet Elena almost didn't hear him. The words hung in the air between them like a confession. Richard, I dream about him sometimes, he continued, still not looking at her. About what he would have looked like. Whether he would have been good at sports, like I was. Whether he would have wanted to follow me into law. His voice cracked slightly. And then I wake up and remember that I'll never know any of those things, and it feels like losing him all over again. Elena moved around the desk, reaching for him, but he stepped away. So, I work, he said. I work 18-hour days and take on new cases, and pretend that if I just stay busy enough, I won't have time to think about what we lost. But you do think about it. Every day. Richard finally looked at her, and Elena saw the exhaustion in his eyes, the weight he'd been carrying alone, every goddamn day, but thinking about it doesn't bring him back, and talking about it just makes it hurt more, so what's the point? Elena felt tears burning her eyes. The point is that we're supposed to be going through this together. Are we? Richard's laugh was bitter. Because it seems to me like you're going through it with a stranger and his baby instead of with your husband. The accusation hit her like a slap. That's not, isn't it? Richard moved to the window, looking out at the lawn they'd once imagined their children playing on. When's the last time you told me you missed James? When's the last time we talked about him without it ending in a fight? Elena tried to remember. The days since James's death had blurred together into a gray haze of sleeping pills and therapy appointments and careful conversations that danced around the crater in the center of their lives. I stopped talking about him. Because you stopped wanting to hear it, she said quietly. I stopped wanting to hear it because it was killing me. Richard turned back to face her. Every time you said his name, every time you cried, it felt like someone was tearing my heart out all over again. I couldn't take it, Elena. I couldn't take your grief on top of my own. They stood in silence for a moment, the truth of their fractured marriage hanging between them like broken glass. So what do we do now? Elena asked. Richard finished his scotch and set the glass down on his desk. I don't know, he said. I honestly don't know. Elena slept in the guest room that night, staring at the ceiling and thinking about the conversation with Richard, about the way he'd looked when he mentioned dreaming about James, about the careful walls they'd built around their grief, and how those walls had ended up separating them from each other. Her phone buzzed at 3 a.m. A text from David. Lucy sleeping through the night for the first time since Maria died. Thank you for today. I don't think I could have gotten through it without you. Elena typed back. You would have figured it out. You're stronger than you think. Maybe. But I'm glad I didn't have to. Elena stared at the message for a long time before responding, Me too. The next morning, Richard was gone before she woke up. He left a note on the Kit Blake counter, meeting clients in Denver, back Thursday. We should talk when I get home. Elena folded the note and put it in her purse, then drove to 5th Street. She found David trying to give Lucy a bath in the Kit Blake sink, both of them soaked and frustrated. Lucy was screaming. David was apologizing to her in a frazzled voice, and the floor was covered with towels. Need some help? Elena asked from the doorway. David looked up, relief flooding his face. She hates baths. I've tried everything, warmer water, cooler water, different soap. She just screams the entire time. Elena rolled up her sleeves. May I? David stepped aside, and Elena slipped her hands under Lucy's tiny body, supporting her head and neck. Lucy's cries softened slightly at the familiar touch. "The water's too deep," Elena observed. "She feels like she's drowning. Try just a few inches, enough to keep her warm, but not enough to scare her." David drained some water from the sink, and immediately Lucy relaxed. "And talk to her," Elena continued, demonstrating with soft murmurs. "Tell her what you're doing, that she's safe, that it's almost over. Babies respond to the tone of your voice, even if they don't understand the words." Together, they managed to get Lucy clean and dried and dressed in a fresh onesie. She settled peacefully in Elena's arms, clean and sweet-smelling and drowsy from the warm water. "You're a natural at this," David said, cleaning up the bathroom flood. "I had a lot of time to research," Elena replied. 6 months of reading everything I could find about babies. What to expect, how to handle every possible situation. I thought if I just knew enough, I'd be prepared for anything. But you can't prepare for loss. No, you can't." David sat beside her on the couch, watching Lucy drift toward sleep in Elena's arms. "Elena, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Yesterday, when you were humming to Lucy that lullaby, you knew all the words." Elena's arms tightened slightly around the baby. "I used to sing it to James. When I was pregnant, I mean. I'd read that babies could hear music in the womb, so I'd sing to him every night." "Do you still sing it?" Elena shook her head. "I tried once, a few weeks after the funeral, but I couldn't get past the first line without breaking down. It felt like false advertising, promising things I couldn't deliver." David was quiet for a moment. What if it's not a promise? What if it's just love? Elena looked down at Lucy, at her perfect sleeping face, at the trust implicit in the way she'd settled so completely in Elena's arms. "I don't know the difference anymore," she admitted. "Maybe that's okay. Maybe not knowing is part of learning how to move forward." Elena's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "This is Kevin Martinez, David's brother. He gave me your number. I wanted to thank you for helping him yesterday. I've been worried sick about how he's handling everything, and it means the world to know he has someone looking out for him and Lucy." Elena showed David the message. "Your brother? He lives in California. Been trying to convince me to move out there, let him and his wife help with Lucy." David's voice was uncertain. "Maybe he's right. Maybe she'd be better off with a real family instead of just me stumbling through it alone." "David, no." Elena's response was immediate and fierce. "Lucy doesn't need a perfect family. She needs you. She needs her father. But what if I'm not enough? What if I can't give her everything she deserves?" Elena looked around the small apartment, at the signs of David's devotion everywhere. The carefully organized bottles and diapers, the mobile he'd hung over Lucy's bassinet, the baby monitor he kept clipped to his shirt even when he was just moving from room to room. "You know what Lucy deserves?" Elena said. "She deserves a father who panics when she cries because he loves her so much it terrifies him. She deserves someone who learns her schedule and her preferences and the exact way she likes to be held. She deserves someone who sees her mother in her face every day and loves her more because of it, not less." David's eyes filled with tears. "Some days I feel like I'm drowning." "Some days you are drowning. That's what grief does. It pulls you under when you least expect it. But you keep coming up for air, and you keep taking care of her, and that's what makes you exactly the father she needs." Lucy stirred in Elena's arms, opening her eyes and looking up with that serious baby expression that seemed to contain all the wisdom in the world. "Hi, sweet girl," Elena whispered. "Did you have a good nap?" Lucy blinked once, twice, then her face crumpled and she began to cry. "Hungry again," David said, already moving to prepare a bottle. "She's going through a growth spurt, I think, eating every 2 hours." Elena stood up, swaying gently with Lucy. "Growth spurts are good. It means she's thriving." As David warmed the bottle, Elena found herself humming again, almost without realizing it. "Hush, little baby, don't say a word." Lucy's crying softened, then stopped altogether. She looked up at Elena with wide, attentive eyes, as if she were listening to every note. "Papa's gonna buy you a mockingbird." Elena's voice caught on the word "Papa," but she kept going. Beside her, David had gone still, the bottle forgotten in his hands. "And if that mockingbird won't sing, Papa's gonna buy you a diamond ring." "Papa," David repeated softly. "Not Mama. Papa." Elena looked at him, understanding passing between them. "She's your daughter," Elena said. "Your song to sing." David nodded, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. "Will you teach me? All the words?" "I'll teach you all the words I know," Elena promised. And as Lucy settled back into Elena's arms, listening to the lullaby that would carry her through whatever came next, Elena felt something she hadn't felt in 6 months. She felt like she was helping to build something instead of mourning what was lost. The knock came at Elena's door on a Tuesday evening, sharp and insistent. She opened it to find David standing on her front porch, Lucy bundled in his arms, both of them soaked from the rain that had started an hour earlier. "I'm sorry," David said immediately, water dripping from his hair. "I know I should have called first, but Lucy's running a fever and I didn't know where else to. Come in." Elena stepped aside, grabbing a towel from the guest bathroom. "How high is her fever?" 101.2. "The pediatrician's office is closed, and the after-hours clinic has a 3-hour wait." David's voice was tight with worry as Elena dried Lucy's face gently. "She's been fussy all day, not eating much. And then, when I took her temperature—" "Breathe," Elena said, leading them into the living room. 101 isn't dangerous for a baby her age, but let's get her dry and comfortable first." Elena had David sit on the couch while she fetched dry clothes from the diaper bag he'd brought. Lucy was whimpering softly, her cheeks flushed with fever, her usual bright alertness replaced by glassy-eyed discomfort. "There's infant acetaminophen in my kit, Blake," Elena said, carefully changing Lucy into dry clothes. "I bought some last week, just in case." David looked surprised. "You bought baby medicine?" Elena paused in fastening Lucy's onesie. She'd been doing this for weeks, buying things Lucy might need, keeping them in her house like offerings to a future she couldn't quite name. Formula and diapers and tiny socks that would fit Lucy's growing feet. She'd told herself it was practical, that David was struggling financially and she could afford to help. But standing here now, looking at his confused expression, she realized it was something else entirely. "I wanted to be prepared," she said quietly. Elena measured out the medicine while David tried to soothe Lucy, who was growing more agitated by the minute. The fever was making her inconsolable, and nothing David tried rocking, singing, changing positions, seemed to help. "Here," Elena said, holding out the tiny syringe. "She'll take it better from you." But when David tried to administer the medicine, Lucy turned her head away, crying harder. The acetaminophen dribbled down her chin, wasted. "Let me try," Elena offered. The moment Elena took Lucy in her arms, the baby's cries softened, not because the fever had broken, but because something in Elena's touch, her voice, her presence, had become familiar, safe, home. Elena got the medicine into Lucy on the first try, and then settled into the rocking chair she'd bought and placed by the living room window, though she'd told herself it was just for reading. "How did you know to do that?" David asked, sinking onto the couch with exhaustion. "Every time I tried, she just cried harder." Elena looked down at Lucy, who had finally relaxed against her chest, tiny fist curled around Elena's finger. "She's used to me now. We have a rhythm." It was true. Over the past 3 weeks, Elena had been at David's apartment almost daily, helping with feedings, teaching David how to read Lucy's different cries, taking over when his inexperience showed. She'd told herself she was just helping a friend, but somewhere along the way it had become more than that. Somewhere along the way, Lucy had begun to feel like hers too. "Elena," David said carefully, "can I ask you something?" "Of course. What are we doing?" The question hung in the air between them. Elena continued rocking Lucy, buying herself time to think, but she wasn't sure how to answer. What were they doing? She was married to a man who couldn't bear to be in the same room with her grief. David was a widower, struggling to raise his infant daughter alone. And somehow, in the space between their respective losses, they'd created something that felt dangerously close to a family. "I don't know," she admitted finally. "My brother called again today. He wants me to bring Lucy out to California for Christmas. Says it would be good for both of us to be around family." Elena's arms tightened involuntarily around Lucy. "What did you tell him?" "That I'd think about it." David leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "But the truth is, I don't want to go. I don't want to leave you." The words landed in the room like stones dropped in still water, creating ripples Elena could feel in her chest. "David, I know," he said quickly. "I know you're married. I know this situation is complicated, but Elena, these past few weeks, you've become the best part of my day. Of Lucy's day." When she sees you walk through the door, her whole face lights up, and when you hold her, he trailed off, searching for words. "When you hold her, you look the way I imagine you would have looked holding James." Elena felt tears burning her eyes. "Don't. Why not? Why can't we talk about what's happening here?" "Because you're grieving and I'm grieving, and we're both confused about what we need versus what we want." Elena's voice was shaking now. "Because Lucy isn't my daughter, and pretending she is won't bring back my son." "I'm not asking you to pretend anything," David said quietly. "I'm asking you to consider the possibility that love doesn't always look the way we planned. That maybe sometimes we get second chances in forms we never expected." Lucy stirred in Elena's arms, making soft baby sounds that weren't quite crying yet. Her fever had broken slightly. Elena could feel the change in her temperature, but she was still restless, still uncomfortable. "She needs a bath," Elena said, grateful for the distraction. "A lukewarm bath to bring her temperature down." They moved to Elena's master bathroom, where the soaking tub was large enough to safely bathe an infant. Elena had bought a special baby bath seat the week before another just-in-case purchase that David didn't question. As they worked together to make Lucy comfortable, Elena tried not to think about how natural this felt. How right. David testing the water temperature while Elena gathered towels. The easy way they moved around each other, practiced from weeks of shared routines. The way Lucy relaxed in the warm water, finally content for the first time all day. "Better?" Elena murmured to Lucy, who was blinking up at them with clearer eyes. "Much better," David said, but he was looking at Elena, not Lucy. After Lucy was clean and dressed in the pajamas Elena kept in her dresser drawer, they settled in the living room with a bottle. Lucy drank hungrily, her fever now completely gone, her usual alertness returning. "Thank you," David said as Elena burped Lucy against her shoulder, "for tonight, for everything." Elena looked around her living room at the baby blankets folded neatly on the side table, at the stack of board books she'd been reading to Lucy, at the way her space had gradually transformed to accommodate the needs of an infant. When had this happened? When had her grief expanded to include not just what she'd lost, but what she might still gain? "David," she said carefully, "when you asked what we're doing, I think maybe we're saving each other. Is that enough?" Elena looked down at Lucy, now drowsy with milk and recovery, her tiny hand fisted in Elena's shirt. "I don't know, but it's something." The front door opened with the sound of keys and footsteps in the foyer. Elena's blood went cold. "Elena?" Richard's voice carried from the entryway. "I saw a car in the driveway." He appeared in the living room doorway and stopped short, taking in the scene. Elena holding a baby, David sitting beside her on the couch, the obvious domesticity of the moment. "Richard," Elena said, her voice steadier than she felt. "You're home early." The Denver meetings ended sooner than expected. Richard's gaze moved from Elena to David to Lucy, his expression unreadable. "I was going to surprise you." David started to stand up. "I should go." "No," Richard said firmly. "Don't leave on my account. I'd like to meet the man my wife has been spending so much time with. Elena felt the tension crackle in the air. Lucy, sensitive to the change in atmosphere, began to fuss. "Richard," Elena began, but he held up a hand. "David Martinez, I assume?" Richard stepped into the room, his lawyer's instincts engaged. "I've heard quite a lot about you, and this must be Lucy." "Sir," David said carefully, still half standing, "I want you to know that Elena has been incredibly helpful. I'm sure she has." Richard's voice was polite, controlled, dangerous in the way Elena recognized from his courtroom victories. "Elena has always been good with children. It's one of the things I fell in love with about her." The past tense hit Elena like a physical blow. Lucy began to cry, not the sick, feverish crying from earlier, but the sharp, distressed cry of a baby who could sense conflict in the adults around her. "She needs to eat again," Elena said, standing up and swaying automatically to soothe her. Her fever just broke and— "Elena," Richard's voice cut through Lucy's cries, "may I speak with you privately?" Elena looked at David, who was gathering the diaper bag with quick, efficient movements. "I should take her home," he said. "Let her sleep in her own bed." "David, wait." But he was already taking Lucy from Elena's arms, already heading for the door. Lucy's cries intensified at being separated from Elena, the sound echoing through the house like an accusation. "David," Elena called after him, but he was gone, the front door closing behind him with a finality that made her chest ache. Elena stood in her living room, surrounded by the evidence of the life she'd been building, in secret baby blankets and bottles and tiny socks facing her husband, across a divide that felt wider than the few feet of space between them. "Well," Richard said after a long moment, "I think we need to have that talk now." Elena sank back into the rocking chair, her arms empty, Lucy's absence like a phantom limb. "Yes," she said quietly, "I think we do." Outside, she could hear David's car pulling out of the driveway, taking Lucy away from her, and Elena realized that for the first time since losing James, she was experiencing a different kind of loss. The loss of something she'd never thought she could have again. The loss of hope. Richard poured himself a scotch before sitting down across from Elena, the coffee table between them suddenly feeling like a negotiating table. The baby blankets and bottles seemed to mock the careful distance they'd maintained from each other for months. "How long?" he asked. "How long what?" "Don't." Richard's voice was sharp. "Don't make me spell it out. How long have you been playing house with another man's child?" Elena felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I haven't been playing house. I've been helping a friend." "A friend." Richard took a sip of his drink, studying her face. "Elena, I just watched you comfort that baby like you were her mother. She stopped crying the moment you picked her up. That doesn't happen overnight." Elena looked down at her hands, still warm from holding Lucy. 3 weeks, maybe a month. Every day, most days. While I was at work, while I thought you were. What? Shopping? Having lunch with friends? Going to therapy? I was going to tell you when. Richard leaned forward. When were you going to tell me that you'd essentially adopted another man's child? That's not what this is, isn't it? Richard gestured around the room at the baby supplies. Elena, you've turned our living room into a nursery. There are bottles in our kit, Blake, diapers in our bathroom, you have a rocking chair by the window, and books about infant care on your nightstand. What would you call it? Elena stood up abruptly, pacing to the window where she could see the street David had driven down, taking Lucy away from her. I call it surviving, by pretending someone else's baby is ours? By learning that love doesn't die when the person you love does. Elena turned to face her husband. By discovering that grief doesn't have to be the only thing that defines me. Richard set down his glass harder than necessary. And what about us? What about our grief? What about our marriage? What marriage, Richard? The question came out harsher than Elena intended, but she didn't take it back. We haven't had a conversation about anything real in 6 months. We sleep in the same bed, but we might as well be strangers. You work 18-hour days to avoid coming home to me, and I— You what? You found a replacement family? Elena felt something crack open in her chest, something that had been building pressure for weeks. I found a reason to get up in the morning. I found a way to use the love I had saved up for James, the love that had nowhere to go when he died. And yes, I found someone who doesn't flinch every time I mention our son's name. Richard's face went very still. I don't flinch. You do, every single time. Like hearing about him causes you physical pain. Because it does. Richard's voice was quiet now, all the lawyer's bluster gone. Because every time you say his name, I remember what it felt like to hold him. All 6 pounds, 2 ounces of him. I remember how perfect he was, how still. I remember thinking that if I just held him tight enough, long enough, maybe he'd take a breath. Elena's anger dissolved, replaced by a grief so familiar it felt like coming home. Richard, I held our son for 47 minutes, he continued, his voice breaking, while you slept after the delivery. I held him and I talked to him and I told him about the college fund I'd already started, about the baseball glove I'd bought when we found out he was a boy. I told him how much we loved him, how much we'd wanted him. Tears were streaming down Elena's face now. I didn't know. You never told me, because what was the point? He was still gone. Talking about it wouldn't bring him back. Richard wiped his eyes roughly. So I put him in that little white casket and I buried him and I tried to figure out how to keep living. But Elena, seeing you with that baby tonight, it felt like you were trying to replace him. Elena sank back into the rocking chair, the weight of Richard's pain settling over her like a blanket. I'm not trying to replace James, she said softly. I could never replace James. But Richard, I can't spend the rest of my life sealed away in this house, afraid to care about anyone because caring means risking loss. So you chose to care about them instead of me. The accusation hung between them, and Elena realized that was exactly what she'd done. Without meaning to, without planning it, she'd opened her heart to David and Lucy while keeping it closed to her husband. I chose to care about someone who let me talk about James without changing the subject, Elena said. Someone who understood that grief and love aren't opposites, that you can miss what you lost and still find joy in what you have. Richard was quiet for a long moment, staring at the baby bottle Elena had left on the coffee table. Do you love him? He asked finally. Elena considered the question, thinking about David's exhausted eyes and gentle hands, about the way he'd held Lucy during her fever, about the quiet understanding that had grown between them. I don't know, she said honestly. I love being needed. I love feeling useful instead of broken. I love watching Lucy grow and helping David learn how to be a father, but I don't know if that's love or just relief from the numbness. And us? Do you love us anymore? Elena looked at her husband, really looked at him for the first time in months. She saw the weight he'd lost, the new lines around his eyes, the way he held himself like he was bracing for another blow. I love who we used to be, she said carefully. I love the couple who planned a nursery and argued about baby names and dreamed about the family we were going to have. But Richard, I don't know if I love who we've become. Richard nodded slowly, as if he'd been expecting this answer. So, what happens now? He asked. Elena thought about David driving through the rain with Lucy crying in the back seat, about the way Lucy had felt in her arms, solid and warm and alive. About the empty nursery upstairs that she still couldn't bring herself to clear out. I don't know, she admitted. I know I can't keep living like this pretending we're fine while we're both drowning, and I know I can't give up Lucy. She's not James, and she'll never be James, but she's hope. She's proof that life continues even after the worst thing happens. Richard stood up, moving to pour himself another scotch. You realize what you're saying, don't you? You're choosing his family over ours. I'm choosing to stop running away from the possibility of happiness with another man. Elena met his eyes. Maybe, Yes. Maybe with another man. The words settled between them like the end of something. Richard finished his drink and set the glass down with careful precision. "I'm going to spend the night at the club," he said. "Give us both some time to think." Elena nodded, not trusting her voice. At the door, Richard paused. "Elena, that lullaby you used to sing to James when you were pregnant, do you remember it?" Elena's throat tightened. "Yes. I used to hear you singing it late at night when you thought I was asleep. I never told you this, but I loved that song. I used to imagine him hearing it too, learning it before he was even born." Elena wiped her eyes. "Hush, little baby. Don't say a word. Mama's gonna buy you a mockingbird," Richard finished softly. "I miss hearing you sing it." After he left, Elena sat in the rocking chair in the dark, surrounded by the remnants of the life she'd built with Lucy, thinking about choices and consequences and the different ways love could break your heart. Her phone buzzed. A text from David. "Lucy's fever is completely gone, sleeping peacefully. Thank you for everything tonight. I hope we didn't cause problems with your husband." Elena stared at the message for a long time before typing back, "No problems that weren't already there. How are you doing?" "Scared," came his immediate reply. "Not about Lucy. About losing you." Elena closed her eyes, feeling the truth of her own feelings settle around her like a decision. "You're not going to lose me," she typed. "We'll figure this out. Together?" Elena looked around the empty house, at the evidence of the family she'd chosen, at the space where her old life used to be. "Together," she confirmed. Outside it was still raining, washing the world clean for whatever came next. Elena woke to sunlight streaming through windows she'd forgotten to close the night before. For the first time in months, she'd slept without pills, exhausted by truth-telling and the weight of decisions that could no longer be postponed. Richard's side of the bed was still empty. She showered and dressed carefully, choosing a simple blue dress that had always been one of David's favorites, though she caught herself thinking this and wondered when his preferences had begun to matter more than her husband's. The drive to Fifth Street felt different this morning. Not furtive or guilty, but purposeful. Like she was finally moving toward something instead of running away. She found David on the metal stairs outside his apartment, Lucy bundled in his arms, both of them dressed for travel. "You're leaving," Elena said, though it wasn't a question. David looked up at her, and she saw resignation in his eyes. "My brother booked us flights to California. We leave this afternoon." Elena climbed the stairs slowly, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Because of last night. Because you're married to a good man who loves you, and I'm a widower with nothing to offer except complications." David shifted Lucy to his other arm. "Elena, I watched your husband's face when he walked into that room. He looked like someone had torn his world apart. Again. Richard and we've been falling apart since long before I met you. But seeing me there, seeing you with Lucy, that's what finally broke it, isn't it?" Elena couldn't deny it. The careful distance she and Richard had maintained, the polite avoidance of anything real, it had all shattered the moment David walked into their living room with Lucy in his arms. "David, please don't go. Give me one good reason to stay." Elena looked at Lucy, who was staring up at her with those serious dark eyes, one tiny fist wrapped around David's finger. "Because I love her," Elena said quietly. "Because somewhere in the past month, she became mine too. Not instead of James, not as a replacement, but as her own person. Because when I hold her, I feel like the woman I was supposed to become before grief changed everything." David was quiet for a moment. "And me? What about me?" Elena met his eyes. "I love you too. Not the desperate love of two broken people clinging to each other, but something deeper, something that feels like building instead of surviving. Elena, I know it's complicated. I know I'm still married, still trying to figure out how to untangle 6 years of marriage from 6 months of grief. But David, if you get on that plane, if you take Lucy away," Elena's voice cracked, "I'll lose both of you, and I can't." I can't lose anyone else I love." David sat down on the metal steps, Lucy cradled against his chest. "What are you asking me to do?" "I'm asking you to give me time. To let me figure out how to end my marriage with dignity instead of running away from it. To trust that what we've built together is worth fighting for. And Lucy, what happens to her while we figure this out?" Elena sat beside him on the narrow step, close enough to touch Lucy's soft cheek. Lucy gets two people who love her completely. She gets a father who would do anything for her and whatever I am to her, whatever she needs me to be. Lucy stirred in David's arms, making the soft sounds that meant she was getting hungry. Without thinking, Elena began to hum softly, almost under her breath. "Hush, little baby, don't say a word." Lucy turned toward the sound, her eyes focusing on Elena's face with the intensity babies reserve for the people they trust most. "She knows you?" David said wonderingly. "She really knows you. And I know her." Elena's voice was thick with tears. "I know she likes her bottles slightly warm but not hot. I know she sleeps best when you play that Mockingbird song on repeat. I know she gets hiccups if you burp her too quickly. And she only likes baths if the water is exactly the right temperature." David was quiet for a long moment, watching Elena with Lucy. "What about your husband?" he asked finally. "What about Richard?" Elena thought about her conversation with Richard the night before, about the pain in his eyes when he'd talked about holding James, about the different ways they'd chosen to grieve. "Richard deserves someone who can love him without reservation," she said. "Someone who doesn't flinch when he mentions our son, someone who can build a future with him instead of staying trapped in the past. And I deserve the same thing. We both deserve to be happy. Just. Not together. That's a big decision to make. It's a decision I made months ago. I just wasn't ready to admit it yet." David shifted Lucy to his shoulder, patting her back gently. "Elena, if we do this, if we try to build something together, it won't be easy. I'm a veteran with PTSD and trust issues. You're a woman learning how to untangle herself from a marriage that should have worked but didn't. Lucy's going to need stability, not two adults figuring out their relationship while they figure out how to parent her. I know. And there will be people who judge us, who say we move too fast, that we're using each other to avoid dealing with our grief. Let them judge." David studied her face. "You're sure about this? About us? About walking away from your life to build something completely unknown?" Elena looked at Lucy, now dozing peacefully against David's shoulder, her tiny hand fisted in his shirt. She thought about the empty nursery waiting at home, about the marriage that had died when James did, about the choice between safety and hope. "I'm sure about love," she said. "I'm sure that Lucy needs both of us, that you need me, that I need this chance to be the mother I was meant to be. The woman I was before grief made me afraid of everything." David kissed the top of Lucy's head, breathing in that sweet baby smell. "Okay," he said softly. "Okay, we'll try." 6 months later, Elena folded the last of Lucy's tiny shirts into the suitcase, marveling at how much an 8-month-old baby could accumulate. Lucy sat in her high chair, banging a wooden spoon against the tray with the focused intensity she brought to everything these days. "Mama," Lucy said clearly, looking directly at Elena. Elena's heart stopped. "David? David, did you hear that?" David appeared in the doorway of their new apartment, bigger than his old place, smaller than Elena's former house, exactly right for a family of 3. "What did she say?" "Mama." "She said, Mama." Elena lifted Lucy from the high chair, spinning her around as the baby giggled. "You brilliant, perfect girl." "Yes, I'm your mama." David wrapped his arms around both of them, his chin resting on Elena's shoulder. "Her first word." "Her first word," Elena confirmed, tears streaming down her cheeks. The divorce had been finalized 3 months ago. Richard had been fair, even generous, asking only that Elena leave him with his dignity intact. They'd divided their assets quietly, sold the house with its empty nursery, and learned how to be strangers again without bitterness. Elena kept the rocking chair. "You ready for this?" David asked, gesturing toward the suitcases packed for their move to California. His brother had offered David a job managing his construction business, and Elena had been accepted into a part-time social work program at UC San Diego, a fresh start for all of them. "I'm ready," Elena said, settling Lucy against her hip. "Are you?" David looked around the apartment that had been their first home together, at the walls covered with pictures of Lucy's first months, at the life they'd built from the ashes of loss. "I'm ready," he said. That evening, their last night in the apartment, they put Lucy to bed together, David reading her a story, while Elena sang the lullaby that had become their nightly ritual. "Hush, little baby. Don't say a word. Mama and Papa are gonna buy you a mockingbird." Lucy's eyes drifted closed, her breathing deep and even. One small fist curled around the stuffed elephant that had been her constant companion since Elena first started spending nights here. "She's perfect," Elena whispered, adjusting Lucy's blanket. "She's ours," David replied, and the word felt like a promise, like a prayer answered. Later, lying in bed with David's arms around her, and Lucy's soft breathing audible through the baby monitor, Elena thought about the night she'd first seen David in the grocery store, about the accusation that had brought them together, about the grief that had nearly kept them apart. "David?" she whispered in the darkness. Do you ever think about what would have happened if we hadn't met, if I hadn't made that terrible mistake that night?" David's arms tightened around her. "Every day. And every day I'm grateful you were exactly where you needed to be, when you needed to be there. Even though I accused you of something horrible? Even though, because it led us here, to this." Elena turned in his arms, finding his face in the moonlight, streaming through their bedroom window. "I love you," she said. "I love you too, both of you, my girls." Elena kissed him softly, tasting the salt of tears she hadn't realized she was crying. From the next room came a soft sound, not crying, just Lucy stirring in her sleep, probably dreaming baby dreams about bottles and songs and the faces of the people who loved her most. Elena had learned to recognize all of Lucy's sounds by now. This one meant she was content, safe, surrounded by love, even in sleep. It was the sound of a child who knew she was home. Elena closed her eyes and let herself drift toward sleep, thinking about mockingbirds and second chances and the way love could grow in the spaces where loss had carved out room for something new. Outside their window, the world continued its ancient rhythm of ending and beginning, of hearts breaking and healing, of families forming in ways no one could have planned or predicted. But inside their small apartment, three people who had found each other in the aftermath of tragedy slept peacefully, dreaming of the morning and all the mornings that would follow, when they would wake up together and begin again the beautiful, ordinary work of loving each other. In her crib, Lucy Rose Martinez stirred once more and settled deeper into sleep, her tiny hand relaxed on her favorite blanket, safe in the knowledge that when she woke, her parents would be there to greet the day with her. Her parents, both of them, forever.